He led his forces to a decisive triumph against overwhelming odds. He defended Britain from invading forces, demonstrating his unwavering courage and dedication to his kingdom. He swore oaths of loyalty and bravery, standing as exemplars of a vision of a noble and honorable kingdom. He embarked on the legendary quest for the Holy Grail. He fought the Battle of Camelot as a testament to his valor and sacrifice. He wielded a legendary sword that had extraordinary power with a divine favor. He was prophesied to become the once and future king, ensuring that his legend lives on throughout the ages. This is the story of a man who became the legend. This is the story of King Arthur. The last designated Roman governor of Britain was Constantine III, who was proclaimed emperor by the Roman troops stationed in the lands of Britain around the 4th century. However, he also left the land to pursue his own imperial ambitions. After the Roman conquerors left, the ancient Britons found themselves in a new era of self-governance. This period, often shrouded in mystery, became known as the Dark Ages. Without a central authority, the land was divided among several Celtic tribal leaders, each declaring himself a king. However, no single ruler managed to unite them all under one crown. During these times, the concept of keeping historical records was nearly non-existent. The majority of the population, from the lowest peasants to the highest nobility, could not read or write. Widespread illiteracy meant that much of what happened during the Dark Ages is left to speculation and myth. The economy of Britannia, in the absence of a centralized system, reverted to a barter system. People traded goods and services directly, without the use of coins or bills. Most of the population were farmers, growing just enough food to sustain themselves and their families. Despite the lack of a monetary system, the expectation to pay taxes remained. Peasants were required to give a portion of their produce and their labor to their feudal lords as a form of tax. This burden could be doubled in times of conflict if two kings were at war over territory. Peasants might find themselves paying taxes to both to avoid retribution. Education was virtually non-existent, leading to a society deeply entrenched in superstition and magic. Although Christianity had begun to spread across the land, many still clung to ancient pagan traditions, blending old beliefs with new religious practices. This era, marked by its lack of unity and stability, laid the groundwork for the complex tapestry of British history. The absence of recorded history from this time adds an aura of mystery to the Dark Ages, a period characterized by its reliance on oral traditions and the resilience of its people in the face of constant change and uncertainty. In the midst of this disruptive era, a man was born, marking the commencement of the legendary King Arthur. King Arthur Pendragon was a powerful king. His reign, marked by war magic and controversy, paved the way for the rise of Camelot and the tales of King Arthur. His legacy is as complex and fascinating as the stories woven around him. The legend is that Arthur was depicted as the illegitimate son of Arthur Pendragon and Lady Igraine, who was married with his rival Lord Gorlois, conceived through magical means by the help of Arthur's in-house wizard Merlin. Arthur's intolerable lust and passion for Lady Igraine's beauty was compelling. Merlin, through his witchcraft and magic spells, helped Arthur into looking like Lord Gorlois to trick Igraine into the act of sexual intercourse. Arthur was the child that was born through trickery and fornication. Lady Igraine did not want to raise the baby, and no one wanted to claim responsibility for that innocent child. Merlin felt incredibly guilty for playing his part in tricking Lady Igraine and helping Arthur. Merlin knew that this boy was actually a prince. He took pity on Arthur and chose to raise him as his son. Lord Gorlois and Lady Igraine would go on to have their own daughter and Arthur's half-sister, Morgan. At that time, women who used to live alone were often accused of witchcraft. a young woman named Vivian was known as the Lady of the Lake, but instead of being a frightening old witch, she was described as a beautiful fairy who lived underwater. For years, the lands were filled with watery lakes and marshes. Ancient Britons had a tradition of making an offering to the lord of the land by tossing their weapons into the lakes and marshes. Because of her reputation as a magical fairy, Vivian's Lake was also a spot where people would throw their swords and weapons in exchange for her blessing. One day, Vivian discovered that someone had left a very different kind of offering on her doorstep. It was a newborn baby boy who had been abandoned by his mother. She decided to raise the orphaned child as her own and named him Lancelot. Merlin was wise enough to understand that the Lady of the Lake wasn't a fairy at all, and he was entranced by Vivian's beauty and strength. He fell in love with her and pleaded for her to give him a chance. Vivian, in exchange for considering Merlin's proposal, wanted Merlin to teach her everything that he knew. Merlin taught Vivian how to practice magic. It is said that the Lady of the Lake traps Merlin forever. Of course, we know that if she trapped anything, it was his heart. They fell in love and lived together in that cottage on the lake. Since Vivian was raising Lancelot and Merlin adopted Arthur, the two boys would have grown up together as brothers. You've probably heard the legend of Excalibur, the magical sword. A boy with no claim to fame came across a sword stuck in a stone. Despite many strong and powerful men trying and failing to pull it out, Arthur did it effortlessly. When he drew Excalibur from the stone, everyone around was amazed. The people couldn't believe what they just saw. This incredible moment made people stop fighting one another. All the arguments and battles that were tearing them apart suddenly seemed pointless. They realized that Arthur was special, someone meant to lead them, so they knelt before him, accepting him as their true king. Arthur pulling Excalibur out wasn't just luck. It was a sign that he was the chosen one. The warring kingdoms continued to fight one another for control of the land during Arthur's youth. Lancelot and Arthur practiced dueling one another from an early age. Arthur's sword was called many names, including Caliburn and Excalibur. Other versions of the legend, stated by the historians, leave out the stone completely and say that the Lady of the Lake, Vivian, gave Excalibur to Arthur. After all, Vivian had an endless supply of weapons thrown into her lake. Since everyone bartered for supplies during the Dark Ages, it would only make sense that Vivian would dive into the lake to retrieve as many valuable weapons as she could. Arthur and Lancelot had the rare luxury of practicing with these expensive swords from an early age, and they were already skilled at fighting years before they became knights. Arthur's half-sister, Morgan, when she was a teenager, wanted to become a druid as well. So she began to study under Merlin, and she earned the nickname Morgan the Fay. At the time, Arthur had no idea that Morgan was actually his half-sister. The two teenagers fell deeply in love. Merlin forbade them both and advised them not to be together, but he never revealed the secret that they were actually siblings. But just like any rebellious teenagers in love, trying to keep them apart only made their passion grow stronger. Merlin realized that he needed to reveal the truth before it was too late. By the time he was in his late teens, Arthur became one of the most skilled warriors in the land, and he gained a massive amount of respect from other knights. King Pendragon and his wife never had another male heir to the throne. Merlin finally revealed the truth to Arthur, that he was actually the prince and the true successor to the crown. But this family drama had to be put on the back burner, because the Saxons began to invade the lands of the Britons. The Saxons were the ancient German people, and they couldn't help but notice all of the chaos going on in England. They decided that now that the Romans were gone, this just might be their chance to take over the land for themselves. Arthur fought against the Saxons with the kings of the Britons. He was commander in those battles. Arthur fought and conquered 12 different battles across all of Britannia. This would have taken years of dedication, moving from place to place until all of the Saxons were driven out of the British Isles. Soon enough, Arthur's name spread across the land. After gaining a loyal fan base, Arthur revealed that he was the illegitimate son of King Pendragon. The people of all of these Celtic kingdoms chose to bend the knee to Arthur, and he was crowned as the once and future king. Arthur built his own castle, Camelot, which is said to be located in modern-day Wales. After becoming king, everyone now knew who Arthur's parents were, and he could never marry his half-sister, Morgan. So he married a woman named Lady Guinevere instead, and went on to have a son named Gawain. Despite the fact that they knew that they were siblings, Arthur and Morgan were still in love with one another. They could not contain their passion and continued this forbidden romance behind closed doors. Morgan became pregnant and gave birth to their son, Mordred. Lancelot had fought alongside Arthur during the war, and he was celebrated as being one of the most skilled knights in the land. He continued to stay by Arthur's side as a lord in Arthur's court and married a beautiful young woman named Lady Elaine. Lancelot would participate in jousting tournaments and became an undefeated champion. Queen Guinevere could sense that King Arthur was not loyal to her, so she and Lancelot began having a secret love affair together. During his battles against the Saxons, Arthur gathered his knights that he knew he could trust and built a large round table in the great hall of his castle. The reason behind choosing this circular shape was that no man would be in a seat that was more important than the other. Dozens of men would gather to discuss politics and plan for future quests. Arthur and his knights went on countless adventures together. One of the most famous quests was their search for the Holy Grail, which was said to have been the cup that Jesus Christ drank from during the Last Supper. The Grail was made of the finest pure gold, and in it were set precious stones of many kinds, the richest and most precious in the earth or the sea. Legend has it that one drink from this cup would heal all wounds and guarantee that its owner would be granted eternal life. Many historians believe that the legend of the Holy Grail was simply putting a Christian twist on the pagan myth of the Cauldrons of Plenty, a concept rooted in Celtic mythology, which includes a number of magical cauldrons with endless abundance or healing powers. These mythical objects are believed to provide unlimited food and drink, symbolizing prosperity, regeneration, and sometimes even knowledge and inspiration. Lancelot and Lady Elaine went on to have a son named Galahad, who was said to have one of the purest hearts of all of the knights in Britannia. The legend is that Galahad was the only knight in Britain's land who had a true enough heart to touch the Grail, but he died in the quest of discovering the Grail. Morgan le Fay uncovered the truth and told King Arthur about the secret love affair of his wife with his best friend and most loyal and trusted knight Lancelot. King Arthur felt betrayed by his closest friend and his beloved queen. Anger and sorrow consumed him. Arthur's knights stormed Lancelot's chamber, seeking revenge for the betrayal. Lancelot faced punishment and met his end at their hands. Guinevere was spared death, but had to live with the pain of seeing her love pay the ultimate price. The kingdom mourned the loss of trust and the consequences of forbidden love. Arthur's son and nephew Mordred knew from an early age that he was the child of incest, but would never be able to reveal to the public that he was the true heir to the throne. When he grew up, Mordred was knighted, but he had to pretend to be only his father's nephew. Mordred's older brother, Gawain, ascended the throne of Norway, but he was also a loyal member of King Arthur's Round Table. Like many royals who were the product of incest, Mordred was known for being more than a little bit crazy. He had an incredibly violent temper. Queen Guinevere and Arthur never had any children together, so there was never an heir to the throne of Camelot. On the other hand, Mordred grew up hating his father, and he came up with a plan on how to take the throne for himself. One day, while King Arthur was away on a quest, his son, Mordred, driven by his own desires for power, did something terrible. He sneaked into the grand halls of Camelot and sat upon the throne, declaring himself king in his father's absence. When King Arthur returned and saw what Mordred had done, his heart sank with sorrow and anger. The betrayal cut deep like a wound to the very heart of Camelot, and an epic war arose. Father and son faced each other on the battlefield, swords clashing in a struggle for the fate of Camelot. The battle raged on, echoing with the cries of war and the clash of steel. In the end, both King Arthur and Mordred were mortally wounded, their lives slipping away with each passing moment. As the dust settled and the battlefield grew quiet, Arthur's loyal knights carried him away from the scene of the tragedy. They took him to a mystical island called Avalon, where it is said that magic still lingered in the air. There, amidst the whispers of the wind and the gentle lapping of the waves, King Arthur was laid to rest. And so, the tale of Camelot came to a close, a story of betrayal and loss that would be remembered for generations to come. But even as the centuries passed and the kingdom faded into legend, the spirit of Camelot lived on, a beacon of hope in a world filled with darkness. And though King Arthur may have gone, his legacy would endure,